They felt there was even divine intervention to keep Donald Trump alive, and they thought they're definitely going to win. And they're talking about these reach states that they might even get that historically vote Democratic. That was not the vibe here. The vibe here was an exhale. There's maybe rejuvenation is a great word.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, what we saw at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Vice President Kamala Harris has officially accepted the Democratic nomination for president after a whirlwind summer.
I know that she'll fight with the same passion, the same determination as President of the United States.
Kamala, she cares deep down, and she will take on the giant corporations that are squeezing American families. In fact, it's something she's done before.
We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world. And on behalf of our children and our grandchildren and all those who sacrificed so dearly for our freedom and liberty, we must be worthy of this moment.
Well, now that the National Convention in Chicago is over, attention turns to the fall campaign against former President Donald Trump. But first, let's recap the DNC and how Massachusetts leaders figured into it with James Pindell, national political reporter for the Boston Globe. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It was a big night for some Massachusetts leaders on the last night of the convention on Thursday. What did they have to say?
Well, first of all, we should point out how just an outsized role Massachusetts played in this convention. Obviously, they did not play the same role in the Republican convention. There's not as much Republican firepower for Massachusetts as there is for the Democrats. But in the final night, we had three big speakers from Massachusetts, which is a big deal. You want to be the last night with the Democratic nominee for president accepting with a big speech. It was Elizabeth Warren, as you heard from at the top, Governor Healy, and Representative Katherine Clark, who is in House Democratic leadership. Their themes were pretty well timed with what the Harris campaign wanted them to say. For Maura Healey, it was more about justice and lawsuits because of her background as the former Massachusetts Attorney General. For Kathleen Clark, it was hitting on child care costs, which is very high, of course, in Massachusetts. It is one of the major themes for Kathleen Clark in her entire career. And again, for Elizabeth Warren, it was what she's been doing her entire career, which has been the economics of middle-class families. And what she was trying to do is make the big definition of how Donald Trump would have a different agenda for those families than she believes Kamala Harris would.
You know, Democrats we've been talking to basically have been rejuvenated by the change to the Harris ticket. At the convention, was that the feeling that you were able to notice also?
What a great question, because my colleagues were trying to find the right word. The word that the Democrats want you to think is joy. If anyone watched the convention, I think joy was a requirement for every single speech. It was mentioned all the time. I think the better word, rejuvenation is a great word. Another word is relief. There was just an outpouring of relief that, as harsh as this sounds, they're not campaigning with Joe Biden, who they feel who would definitely be headed towards a loss after that the June 27th debate. They just were not feeling well, and they're just so happy that they have a chance, which is a different vibe than Republicans had a month ago. A month ago, Republicans had their convention, and it was a couple of days after an attempted assassination attempt, and they felt like this is in the bag. They were super confident that they felt there was even divine intervention to keep Donald Trump alive, and they thought they're definitely going to win, and they're talking about these reach states that they might even get that historically vote Democratic. That was not the vibe here. The vibe here was an exhale. There's maybe rejuvenation is a great word. There's energy, but they also felt like this race is extremely tied and they have to get to work.
Now, aside from the different feelings at each convention, what kind of policy differences were expressed at the Democratic convention as compared to the earlier Republican convention?
Boy, they could not be more drastically different. There was a lot of religious overtones at the Republican convention, what they want to do for the restoration of the American soul. But look, there's a lot of discussion, frankly, about crime, a lot of discussion about immigration. I mean, remember, they were holding up signs at the Republican convention saying deport them all or deport them now. And this is a different environment here. What was interesting about the Democrats is it wasn't just naturally traditional things. Climate change was discussed, but not emphasized. Medicare for all, a topic in the last presidential campaign, wasn't even brought up once. No one even brought up the Green New Deal. So when we talk about these traditional Democratic themes, they were in the background, but what they were emphasizing were more centrist things, caring for veterans, housing, and creating jobs. And then also a strong focus on national security, and then just a big focus on democracy. January 6th was a big theme of the Democratic convention.
For people who saw the nightly primetime speeches, that's only part of the convention. What kind of business got taken care of during the daytime in Chicago among the Democrats who were gathered there?
It's a great question. Look, this is not about traditional organizing and how you're going to make phone calls or organize folks back home. There was a lot of discussion about policy, a lot of discussion about ambitious people. So look, you have everyone, including Massachusetts, having breakfasts in the morning that involve people from out of state or in state trying to introduce themselves or introduce themes. And then there were different caucuses. You have every caucus under the sun. And what I mean by a caucus is either Asian American caucus or the Veterans Caucus, Native American caucus or Rural Voters Caucus. And they were discussing what would be an agenda for Democrats moving forward. It was really a chance for a lot of the Democrats around the country just to meet each other and to begin to create coalitions for the future.
Now, we know Massachusetts is not a swing state, but as we head toward the fall, what kind of role do you think some of the people we have been talking about will play in the campaign? I know that Warren is set to hit the campaign trail immediately. New Hampshire next door is closer than Massachusetts, obviously. So what do you expect to happen next?
That's right. The focus will be what can happen on these 7 swing states. I was going to point out that for all the pomp and circumstance, and Democrats did have a very successful convention, but Republicans at the time had a successful convention, and there was really no polling bump. It's the same. Democrats are going to head into next week with the same exact landscape that they did when they entered this week. There's 7 states this campaign is going to come down to. Kamala Harris certainly has the momentum, but the next debate on September 10th will be huge, absolutely huge, and can change the race. But in terms of going forward, Massachusetts is expected to be an ATM for this campaign. There's already 3 fundraisers that have happened in the state, including Western Massachusetts, with either Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. And then they expect for folks to have a lot of energy, even from their house, to make phone calls into those swing states.
Are there any races in the Bay State this year that you think are closer than has been reported or deserve a second look?
Gosh, I wish. Massachusetts is unique. I wish as a political junkie. But Massachusetts is unique for how few elections have been competitive. In fact, it's been a crazy outlier, even when it comes to the primary elections coming up in a few weeks, with just how few primaries there are. It's literally the national leader for how few of primaries there are. But in terms of the House, nothing is that competitive. The Senate, Elizabeth Warren looks to be a lock.
Well, we really appreciate your time, and thanks for speaking to us after the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. James Pindell is national political reporter for the Boston Globe, and we look forward to catching up this fall as we get closer to Election Day.
I'm thrilled you asked.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.